The market's wrong. Like Bitcoin is massively undervalued right now. And again, reiterating what I'm saying, there is just so little Bitcoin out there. Every quarter, Tether is going to be buying Bitcoin. Every couple months, MicroStrategy is buying, Semler is buying, and we're going to see more and more of that. So you can see the tide already turning. But just like in The Big Short, the market takes time to realize what's happening.
It's Monday, September 9th, and this is Markets Daily, hosted by me, Jen Sanasi. On this show, we navigate the currents shaping the crypto markets, providing insights against the broader financial landscape. So, whether you're actively trading or simply fascinated by the volatility of the crypto markets, this show is your compass to understanding what's happened, where we are, and where we are going. Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Joining today's show is someone I'm very excited to talk to, Bitcoin OG, JAN3 CEO Samson Mow. Samson, how's it going?
It's going. It's great to be on, Jen.
It's great to have you here, and I'm so happy to have you here in an interesting time for Bitcoin. I want to talk a little bit about recent price action in just a second, but I want to start with a broader question for you. What are you watching?
In terms of what, TV or markets?
Crypto markets.
Crypto markets, I mean, there are a number of indicators that I like to watch. I mean, okay, first of all, I'm only watching Bitcoin because I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, and that's the only one I really care about. So I'm watching Bitcoin with a great deal of interest. And there's a number of indicators I look at, like stablecoin AUM, um, interest payments on debt. I think the US dollar and Bitcoin are very much linked together. And just general things like demand from ETFs and from corporate players like MicroStrategy.
Let's talk about those three things you just mentioned and start with stablecoin AUM. Why is it important for folks who are investing in Bitcoin, who are watching Bitcoin, to pay attention to what's happening in the stablecoin markets?
Right. So I think it is important because it's an indicator of overall interest and demand. And what we've seen is the demand for stablecoins has just been going up and to the right nonstop. We're seeing more and more adoption, especially of USDT in global markets where they're quite dominant. And it's being used in LATAM and other markets as just digital dollars. They don't even call it a stablecoin. They don't call it Tether. They don't call it USDT. They just say digital dollar. So it's become ubiquitous. And I think that is a gateway into other assets like Bitcoin. So it's a good indicator of where Bitcoin is going, but it is going, it is going up all the time. And another parallel to that is Bitcoin hash rate. That's another indicator I think that is very important to watch. We're at 740 exahash now, which is all-time highs for Bitcoin hash rate. That's the power that's supporting the Bitcoin network. And that is a really good indicator of where things are going in terms of price, because usually it's a leading indicator and it dictates where price is going. And all-time high for hash rate usually will lead to an all-time high in price. And it's even more interesting to watch at this time because as the price is somewhat depressed, we're not at the all-time high for price. We're still seeing hash rate coming online, which indicates a very strong vote of confidence from entities that are mining, either corporate or nation state, that they're expecting Bitcoin prices to balance out the cost to produce Bitcoin through mining with the market price of Bitcoin.
All right, let's talk on the second point. Well, it's actually the third point you mentioned, but I'm going to mention it second. MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor, why are you watching? What's going on there?
Well, it's a very interesting thing because MicroStrategy usually pre-announces their contribution to Bitcoin demand. Like we know that they're going to buy $2 billion worth of Bitcoin, and I guess credit also should go to Mara. They also pre-announced their buy, but I think that is a large spike in demand that we should be watching out for. And this is really why I believe the markets are irrational right now. You have a lot of fear permeating the market and in sentiment of investors and traders, I guess, that Bitcoin price is going to go down for a number of reasons. But this is predicated on potential selling or macroeconomic factors. But it seems to be that they put very little weight into these obvious spikes in demand that are pre-announced well in advance. But speculation on potential selling and even a little bit of selling like from Mount Gox can cause the market to be very jittery, but they just
Mhm.
completely disregard this beacon of demand that is broadcasted out there from companies like MicroStrategy.
And Samson, forgive me. I know MicroStrategy was your third point. I forget your second indicator that you're watching. What did you say?
I've forgotten too now. But
Okay.
let me think. There's like I think there's a number of indicators. Stable coins, ETFs. Was that is ETF demand, right?
It
That
wasn't
was another one.
ETFs. It
Okay.
wasn't. Maybe our producer will tell us in a second. We can talk
Okay.
about market sentiment and we'll come back to your second point. Let's dig a little bit deeper into market sentiment now. You mentioned people are fearful, especially people who are new to the space. Um, we saw Bitcoin hit all-time highs earlier this year, and now it's really kind of trading in this like 55,000 dollar range. What do you make of that? What should we be watching? And why are you not as fearful, maybe, as some of the newer investors to the space?
Well, for most Bitcoiners, I don't believe they are very fearful. I mean, opportunities to buy at lower prices is a godsend. And it's like you're happy both ways. You're happy when it goes up because obviously it's up, but you're also happy when it goes down because you're accumulating more Bitcoin and
Hmm.
maybe lowering your cost basis for acquisition of Bitcoin. But the Bitcoin is a very interesting asset because it is a bearer asset. You can hold it yourself. There the supply schedule is fixed, right? Every 4 years there's a halving, and it's like every 10 minutes there's a block. There's not that much to worry about if you're a hodler, or what we call people that hold Bitcoin. So you can kind of put it into cold storage, turn your phone off or your computer off, and just go travel and read books for a year and come back, and you know you'll see what happens. Like, the price probably will go up. But it differs from things like fiat money, where you have to pay attention. You have to be watching the Federal Reserve. You have to dial into the FOMC meetings and hang on to every word being said. If you're holding equities, you have to pay attention too. So I think it's a very different thing. And as people understand this interesting property of Bitcoin, that you just buy and hold it for long periods of time, more people will start to understand that the short-term price volatility is really a distraction. You're not buying Bitcoin for the gains in the next year. You're buying Bitcoin for the gains in 10, 20 years, which is almost guaranteed.
I'm a hodler, and my mom even knows what hodl means now. She sometimes calls me and asks me how my coins are doing, and I have to explain to her, like, that's not the point, mom. We're holding on.
Exactly. But going back to the sentiment, like the the narratives I hear right now that are kind of just really exasperating are things like, well, rate cuts are coming. And suddenly now people have decided rate cuts are bearish because there could be a recession if there are rate cuts. But, just roll back the clock a couple of years, everyone was complaining about high rates, and there's very low liquidity in the marketplace because no one has money. So you can't have it both ways. Is it bearish or is it bullish? It's only one or the other. I think it has to be bullish because you're seeing more liquidity being injected into the system. Another one was, what was it again? That historically September is a red month. Bitcoin does not perform well, and there are reports in various news outlets and by various technical analysts saying, Bitcoin could drop 40%. But we already had a big drop. I don't think you can just go back to analyze historical data and say it's going to happen again. We had a big drop, and the interesting thing about that big drop was the massive influx of buying that came when Bitcoin went to the low 50s. This was when the US market opened. So the yen carry trade blew up, Japanese
Mhm.
market, Asian markets were tanking. And then the moment that the US market opened, you just see Bitcoin rebounding. And I think that goes to show that there is strong demand, especially from the ETFs, where they're relatively price insensitive. And that also applies to Bitcoin being sort of recession proof because you have large pools of institutional capital that have nothing else to do. So in a recession, I think ordinary people, retail investors, probably are going to have a hard time. But we are seeing pension funds with hundreds of billions of dollars invest in Bitcoin. And that doesn't really change in a recession. They still need to meet their obligations and deliver to the pensioners. And it's the same for every other major institutional investor. They're sitting on piles and piles of cash, and they're going to do something with that. and it's likely that they will put it into Bitcoin. At least that's the trend I'm seeing.
Well, I got to ask you, I know you're a Bitcoin OG. You've been in the space for a really long time. Anyone who follows you knows that you are a big proponent for decentralization. You've mentioned the ETF now here twice, and I know that you work with nation states on the adoption of Bitcoin, which you've alluded to a little bit in this conversation. Um, as someone who believes in decentralization, talk to me a little bit about the launch of the ETFs, nation state adoption. Do you think that brings some centralization to Bitcoin? Does that worry you at all when we look at the ethos of Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I think I hear that commentary a lot. Like, why are we at JAN3 working with nation states to implement Bitcoin strategies when you don't want them to have it? But first, a nation state adopting Bitcoin is literally the separation of money and state. It's a voluntary separation. And I think that is a good path to pursue and to advocate for. It reduces the power of the state. It separates the ability to print money out of thin air from the state by them adopting Bitcoin. The second point I would make to that is it is a good thing for price insensitive investors like nation states to get into Bitcoin because they effectively have unlimited funds to print money with. Like they can print money. So if they want Bitcoin, I think that starts to solve some of that problem. It alleviates some societal problems too when we inevitably rebase to a Bitcoin standard. If they start sooner rather than later, then it's easier to onboard, hundreds of millions of people and billions of people into a Bitcoin standard. But the key thing is like they will be buyers of Bitcoin once they understand that Bitcoin is valuable and they want it. So that money will just flow into Bitcoin. There's just no accountability. At least with institutional funds, they technically need to get the money from people that invest into them and then deploy it. But a nation state can just turn on a fire hose and inject money into Bitcoin. But also that applies to mining as well. I think nation states mining are also going to be less price sensitive compared to, I don't know, more corporate company level miners, which might need to sell Bitcoin to pay power bills. But
Mm.
most energy companies are state owned. And if you see the merger between mining Bitcoin and energy, they do need a base load consumption or usage of the base load. So as it becomes one and the same, that a energy company is a Bitcoin mining company, you'll see less volatility in the market because they're not needing to sell Bitcoin.
Mm.
They're just mining Bitcoin because they have excess energy. But I think we're already seeing the market move away from that with companies like Marathon buying Bitcoin instead of selling Bitcoin. There's no reason at all for a public mining company to be selling any Bitcoin. They should be pursuing the MicroStrategy playbook, which is debt to buy more Bitcoin on top of what they are already mining. But back to the original point, I don't think Bitcoin is incompatible with centralized entities holding Bitcoin because the network itself is decentralized. And I think you have to run it through, um, run through the plays in your head. Like if Bitcoin is valuable, countries will inevitably want it, just like they want gold and other things. So sooner or later, countries will want Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoin has been designed in such a way that large holders like countries or institutions having Bitcoin does not impact the network itself. Because while Bitcoin is in the financial system now, because it is connected through the ETFs, it is still separate from the financial system. So the financial system can drive Bitcoin price short term based on the equities markets or whatnot, but it is totally separate. And like I said before, you can just have your Bitcoin in cold storage. And then at that point, you're totally disconnected from everything. They can do everything they want on this side, issue paper Bitcoin. Hedge funds can short it on derivatives exchanges and whatnot, but you still have your Bitcoin and it's always in your possession in cold storage.
What's the biggest misconception you think people have about Bitcoin?
That's an interesting one. I think there's two big ones. One is that you need to trust Bitcoin. And I hear this from time to time like, I don't really know about Bitcoin. I don't really trust it. But the whole point of Bitcoin is that you don't need to trust Bitcoin. You can verify the code and you can check the math. So you can audit supply instantly. The other one is that people don't understand how scarce Bitcoin is. So in this last few months, I've been engaging with some politicians in Asia where I was traveling. And it always comes down to, we'll look into it later. But there is no later, I think. The opportune time to get into Bitcoin likely has already passed. So if you look at who's holding a lot of Bitcoin, MicroStrategy has 220,000. The ETFs in the US have about 900,000. And then you have all the other various holders, like Bitfinex has a large chunk. There's the BitMEX Insurance Fund, and Binance has a good chunk too. But there is not a lot of room to increase holdings at this point. So if you ask yourself, can the US ETFs increase from 900,000 to 2 million Bitcoin, like 10% of the supply? That is going to be exponentially harder than what they've accomplished now in terms of accumulation, because there's not a lot of Bitcoin left. If you look at the ETF holdings of different regions, the US with 900,000, Hong Kong, which came after the US, they have, I think, 4,500 ish now, Australia, 100 something. So both of those regions waited until the US went okay and said go for the ETFs, and then they launched theirs. But launching second and third does no service to you because they've already got the lion's share. And I think it's going to be the same for nation state level accumulation because there's just not a lot left. So can MicroStrategy grow their stack from 220 to 440? I don't see it happening because there's just not a lot there. The ETFs can't double their stack either. So once this incredible scarcity of Bitcoin really hits home and everyone starts to grok that, I believe the price is going to start to appreciate very rapidly.
You tweeted recently that you feel like Michael Burry in The Big Short. I want you to unpack that for me because I feel like it's related to what you're saying.
Yeah, so I mean, Michael Burry is famously known for shorting the housing market, and he had his thesis, and the market moved against him. I have my thesis that we will see an Omega candle, which is a $100,000 candle on the daily, which means Bitcoin would go tomorrow to 160,000, and I just see all the macroeconomic factors pointing towards that happening. U.S. debt, I think that was the one we missed, but debt
That
is,
was the one. I'm pretty
yeah,
sure.
U.S. debt is now $3 billion a day. Previously, it was $1 billion increase per day, and interest payments next year are likely going to top 1 trillion on a 36.7 trillion debt at that time. Who knows? But none of this is sustainable. And at the same time, you have strong Bitcoin fundamentals. You have strong corporate acquisition of Bitcoin by MicroStrategy, by Tether, and others. You have the ETFs, which are still accumulating. It's been flat for the last couple of days, but on net, they're always accumulating. And then you have this crushing debt that has to be dealt with. Either you rebase dollars to Satoshis or you default. There's no other way. There's no way to pay that debt. There's no way to grow out of that debt. So it just seems to be the system seems to keep on rolling when we should see Bitcoin massively going into full bull market FOMO mode right now.
I want to talk about that bull market FOMO mode. I know you made headlines earlier this year when you said that Bitcoin could reach $1 million this year, and if not this year, 2025. Do you still stand behind that?
I think so. The market's wrong. Like Bitcoin is massively undervalued right now at whatever it is, 56, 7,000 per coin. Um, and again, reiterating what I'm saying, there is just so little Bitcoin out there. You can't double your holdings as a large entity at this point. So it's going to shoot up. The pressure has to be alleviated in other ways. So what I see right now is Bitcoin's like a beach ball and we're pushing it underwater right now, and people are starting to get bored. Maybe it's intentional, maybe it's paper Bitcoin shorting Bitcoin and pushing the price down, but that is not sustainable simply because there's so much buy demand. Every quarter, Tether is going to be buying Bitcoin. Every couple months, MicroStrategy is buying, Semler is buying, and we're going to see more and more of that. The one of the largest pension funds in the world in Korea is allocating to MicroStrategy now. So you can see the tide already turning. But just like in The Big Short, the market takes time to realize what's happening. It's always going to be the people that are paying attention to Bitcoin that see all these factors and are allocating to it. This is why Michael Saylor is going to try to buy as much as he can right now.
And the last thing I want to ask you, Samson, before we wrap it up, we touched a little bit on you working with different nation states. Are there any particular nations that you can tell us about that have a really progressive uh, take, or they have a really progressive policy or look at what they want to do with Bitcoin?
I think there is always more interest when the price is going up and when the price is flat.
It's unfortunate when that
Yeah,
happens, right? Because it's definitely harder to buy in when the price is up.
but there's definitely a comparison. If you look at ordinary people, they want to buy Bitcoin when it's at all-time highs. They're not interested when we're down in the 50s, right? And it's the same thing. Like everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve. But we do have a lot of interesting conversations going on. The challenge is for us working on nation state adoption is that we have to work with the governments, and there's a lot of turnover, and there are a lot of challenges internally to work with these governments. Sometimes we make a lot of headway, and the government's overthrown, and we have to start from zero. So it's a process. It's not like walking into Walmart to buy a toaster.
I believe that. I mean, I follow the news and I 100% believe it is not like walking into Walmart to buy a toaster. I guess take us home here. Given the work that you do with nation states, the conversations you're having behind closed doors, you may have a little bit more intel than the rest of us who are just watching what happens via various media platforms. Does the work you do, the conversations you have they changed the way you look at Bitcoin from a market's perspective?
I don't think it really changes the way I look at Bitcoin. I just
Mhm.
look at it and I think it's incredible that we're sitting where we're at today and we're not above 100,000 just because of all the market conditions. And I think it just has to do with people being unaware of the key properties of Bitcoin, why you want Bitcoin, and the incredible scarcity of Bitcoin. But it is changing because we haven't done any big announcements, but we have been meeting with politicians and regulators like, throughout the world this year, and we are telling them these things. And usually at the end of those meetings, you see a light behind their eyes, like they're thinking about it now that we've laid it out flat for them on the table, and they're seeing that okay, there's not a lot left. And if we wait for, say, the strategic Bitcoin reserve, if Trump wins, well, you're going to get the same thing. You're going to have the US with the lion's share of Bitcoin, and you'll be lucky if you have 100, right? At that point, it'll be the exact same scenario as the ETF. So I think we just have to keep on working and pushing that. And hopefully we get a second El Salvador this year. I'm hoping it will be Argentina personally. But the second one will likely kick things into high gear.
Are you hoping it will be Argentina, or do you maybe know it's going to be Argentina?
I cannot confirm or deny.
All right. Samson, at the beginning of the show, I asked you what you were watching. You asked me if I meant TV or the markets. We talked about the markets. What are you watching on TV?
I'm watching Kaiju number 8 on Netflix. It's really good.
Okay. I have not watched it yet. I will check it out. And I urge our audience to check it out too. Samson, thank you for joining Markets Daily today.
Thanks, Jen.
And thank you for watching and listening to our show. If you like listening, subscribe to the CoinDesk Podcast Network on all podcast platforms. And if you like watching, subscribe to our YouTube, give us a thumbs up. Let us know what you like about the show. Let us know what you don't like about the show. We always, unfortunately, read the comments. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow.